A Guardian's Tale, written and narrated by YonathanJ. Part 3. Trophies. Why didn't I kill the boy when I had the chance? My tranquility ruined by my own indecision. I can't quite make sense of my choice to let him get away. It's almost as if my body refused to move, to take the shot. I know I would have hit him. What nonsense. Sitting here on the ancient stone slab, eyes closed, listening, always, unconsciously to nature, I can't help but fantasize about the consequences of the kid's escape. Perhaps he would never come back and warn of a terrible but merciful guardian there in the woods, and never again would I have to fight to the death any intruders. Somehow that thought fills me with grief. What is the point of protection if no threats ever arise? Although the opposite could also happen. To look up to the edge of the forest and assess the enemy forces, led by the hateful kid. His eyes lodge onto me. He commands the charge as I ready myself, surrounded. My worst enemy, a child. How absurd. The flapping of wings steer me away from my thoughts. A flock of sparrows playing above me, a few perch on my shoulders, others on the grass in front of me, pecking the ground. The stream is flowing more than usual due to the rain of the last few days. The bliss of solitude with nature's company. Behind me, the gate, its olden architecture telling me of a long-gone era, of intricate stonework and mythic ruins, the only vestige in perfect condition, the remaining ruins around me being quite decrepit. The stone slab on which I always sit is of white, immaculate marble, or so I suppose, and next to me the remnants of what used to be perhaps a wall, now only a few feet high. On its surface my countless trophies of memorable battles. I almost forgot about them. I remember once I shied away from keeping such souvenirs, not seeing any purpose in them. Yet presently I find a sort of solace in them, in what they represent. After all, they are the proof of the past, the irrefutable evidence of every intruder I encountered over the years. In them, even my faulty memory is saved from oblivion. Or so I like to think. I get up, and the birds scatter, consterned by my sudden movement, chirping in indignation. What are these things littering the wall? An old copper dagger covered in verdigris, a pair of folded leather gloves eaten by time, a silver button holding on to a purple piece of fabric, among other things, and there, glowing in the soft sunlight, a glass bottle containing a few drops of crimson liquid catch my eyes. I take it, and what remains of the potion inside moves almost imperceptibly, so thick and rich it is. The cork is covered in dust, so is the glass itself. I take a piece of fabric and wipe it all away, smiling. I can't decide if this is my favorite trophy, but it is my most memorable. From what I can remember at least. How close I came to defeat back then. It was one hot morning of summer, and the land was under a dry spell. It was either a few years ago or a few hundreds, I can't remember. And under the cloudless sky the forest was parched, arid. Never had I seen such extreme weather before. The stream was gone, its pebble bed the only hint that water used to flow usually. How thirsty I felt, sitting there in the sun, hallucinating vividly, as I struggled to focus on my duty. I kept imagining a woman dancing in front of me, as a wavering flame in the cruel heat. A priestess, nay, an empress, dressed in red silk and golden jewelry, dancing and dancing for days on end. What madness these days were. I really thought that dying of thirst was going to be my end, and how bitter I felt of not dying in glorious battle, as has always been my dream. My sweat was licked dry by desperate critters, struggling to survive in the heat, and I was madly in love. The dancing lady was my whole world. She filled my eyes with her sensual movements, to the shrilling and eternal music of the cicadas chorusing away. I wished to get up and take her, offer her all the love that blossomed in me, yet my body couldn't move. and I felt the weight of the sun pushing down on me, harder and harder, as high noon was nigh. Dread filled me, as I felt death's embrace, yet I fought it, and perhaps I survived by pure will. I struggled and panicked, and at once I managed to move my arm, and pushed myself upward. Standing up, after days of searing heat, I lost consciousness, ending in someone's arm. My Empress! I remember how glad I was, and I cried dry tears as she held me so dearly in her arms. On my lips I felt it. Life and love, pure, unconditional love, rekindling me, the fire of my soul blazing anew. I opened my eyes, not to the godly face of my dancing lady, but to a hand, holding a glass bottle to my lips. I was in the arms of a woman, yet not my dazzling Empress. I got up, as confused as ever. Panicking, the woman stood up, dropping on the ground the potion that saved my life. A red-haired maiden with a surprised look on her face. Her hair was short and her skin was covered with freckles, and her bottom lip was shaking out of fear. I looked around for my spear out of pure instinct. There it was, out of arm's reach. The maiden moved away, afraid of my sudden aggressivity, and shouted something in an unknown language. Behind me a man replied, and I heard the unsheathing of a sword. I froze and turned around. Coming from near the gate, the man approached me, holding his rapier in perfect form. At that moment I saw red. Did he dare approach the gate? How careless I was! I examined him, assessing his strength. He wore no armor, probably due to the heat. His skin was tan, and his face bore the traces of a long life. On his neck, a shining talisman in the shape of a ship. I could see, on his hip, a water pouch. And how thirsty I still was, I knew what I wanted. Now behind me, the maiden took a few more steps away, her words incomprehensible, yet I could hear the panic and fear in her voice. Unarmed, I faced the man approaching me, holding his rapier, one arm folded behind him. In his eyes, confidence. I could see in his footwork how ready he was to launch toward me in flesh, to land a fatal blow. Although I wasn't afraid. The situation was a puzzle to solve, and my parched mind was slowly getting back into gear. Yet the man, surely a master swordsman, kept shifting his eyes between me and the maiden, perhaps his partner. Unconsciously at first, I realized that I was backing away from him as he advanced. I knew if he got close enough, that would be the end of me. Never before had I faced an enemy with such presence and at such a disadvantage. If only I had my spear and shield, I would make quick work of him. At the moment, the swordman would surely cut me down if I were to make a run for them. My only option was to wait for an opportunity. I focused on the tip of the man's rapier, dancing a few meters away from my eyes, glowing of a white, blinding light under the sun. A deadly dot, a lethal fairy, nagging me with her untraceable movements. The sun was reaching its zenith. The air was still, and wind was but a mid. How heavy was time for all three of us, stuck as statues carved of despair. How long were we petrified in the eternal present? Until I saw it, a flinch of the arm, fatigue, sweat dripping from his shaken chin. His rapier fell ever so slightly down from his perfect form. Now! I leaped forward, unleashing all my energy in a sudden charge. The maiden wailed behind me, her horror painting the world in red. The master swordsman reacted perfectly and pointed his rapier so that I would impale myself on it as I charged toward him. Yet I was bluffing, using his fatigue to close the distance and reach my spear at last, on the ground a few meters away. In a fraction of a second, I had turned the tides in my favor. No longer aligned, the three of us formed a triangle. I grabbed my spear, and as I lifted it in position, the man cleverly wasted no time and lunged toward me, his rapier closing the distance faster than I could see it. I backed away by instinct, raising my spear in the hope of blocking the attack. The rapier pierced my shoulder, the tip of the blade lodging itself in my bone. The pain, excruciable. Wounded? Me? Yet this pain was nothing compared to my thirst, and I backed away once more, feeling the warm metal of the rapier leave my shoulder, thick blood dripping down on my grey skin. The swordman took a few steps back, away from my deadly spear, and spun his rapier, ready to launch again. My right arm was struggling to keep the spear in position. My left arm was doing most of the heavy lifting. I knew if he were to attack again, I couldn't react in time. And so I attacked first, closing the distance and using my superior reach to hopefully land a hit on his throat. The man read my attack and backed away in time, positioning himself between me and the maiden. I remember just how hilarious that moment was back then. So slow from thirst and fatigue. There I was, desperately fighting, the gate behind me untouched, as the master swordsman defended his maiden perfectly. For the first time, due to the circumstances, I was matched in skills. How exhilarating. In his stance, in his gaze, in his masterful aura, I saw a bit of myself. I saw him as an undeniable force, able to stop anything from getting through. For once I had respect for another being. Yet what he was protecting was love, not duty. And so I lowered my spear, just a bit. Surely she wouldn't let him risk his life again. And while the swordsman prepared to launch toward me once more, his rapier shaking, the maiden held his arm. She grabbed him, and I could see silent tears flowing on her cheeks, twinkling in the sun. They were retreating toward the edge of the forest. As I stood there, overwhelmed by relief, my shoulder was killing me, and as they vanished in the orange woods, I collapsed. I laid on the ground, my eyes staring deep in the cruel sun high above everything. My blood was boiling, and I surely would have died there if an opportunist sparrow had not flew over and pecked my wound, awakening me in suffering to the torture of nature. I tried to chase the bird away, yet it held on to me with mad obstinance, so thirsty it was. A sparrow turned vampire. Drink on, then. Dazed, I managed to lift my head up. There, on the ground, the potion. In the panic of the moment, the maiden had forgotten it. How careless of her. I crawled on the ground, inching toward the potion, my thirst at an all-time fever. I could only imagine the sweet embrace of the bottle's lips. I reached it and took a sip. How warm and unpleasant it was. Despite my thirst, I stopped myself from drinking it all. Barely. I felt as the sparrow on my shoulder, drinking blood out of necessity, out of survival. I grabbed the bird and threw it away at last. Surely it also had drank enough. My shoulder was tingling, itching. Perhaps it was healing. What a relief. I carefully stood up and noticed on the horizon a tall grey wall of clouds creeping in. Providence!